Hold on. I promise this video is not a doom posting video. Robin and Aventurine's new summer forms are probably my most anticipated characters in a long time. I haven't been this excited for a character to release since Cyrene, so these characters are definitely going to be the highlight of the entirety of Plan Arcadia for me. I love our Penacony duo, and I would never wish bad things upon them. This video has nothing to do with me doom posting them, and is simply a way for me to share some of my concerns regarding a certain controversy currently occurring in the Honkai Star Rail meta, and how I think it's going to impact Robin and Aventurine and any future characters. I am of course referring to the phenomenon known as infinite loops. Now, some of you may be thinking, what is an infinite loop? Granted, more people have probably become aware of this term since Gilgamesh's beta, but in essence, an infinite loop describes a scenario where a team in Honkai Star Rail is capable of taking an infinite amount of actions at the cost of 0 action value. This occurs due to characters like Mortonak's Blade and Tribby being capable of constantly feeding each other energy through their follow-up attacks and AoE attacks. Combine this with other characters that can gain special energy based on other characters constantly launching attacks, such as Acheron, or even Casterus when paired with Luocha to constantly heal the team, and thus constantly give Casterus Nubud stacks every time allies attack, and you create a rotation that infinitely funnels energy and charge mechanics to every character on the team, allowing them to loop their attacks back to back to back non-stop. The enemy will never get to take a turn, and the damage ceiling of the team becomes actual infinity. You could put the team up against a boss with an infinite amount of HP, leave the game open for a few weeks, come back, and the team will still be looping their attacks at the exact same action value. I don't think I need to emphasize how ridiculous and unhealthy this is for the game's balance. Hoyo is very much aware of how game-breaking this interaction can be, which is why they have tried so desperately to avoid creating infinite loops in recent betas. For those who have been out of the loop, the last 2 beta cycles have introduced several different infinite loops. It started in patch 4.3's beta with Mortonak's Blade and his old E2 giving him double the charge for follow-up attacks, making his ability to loop follow-up attacks for more energy for more ultimates even more out of control than it currently is. This led to several infinite loops that Hoyo of course tried to destroy by changing his E2 to what it currently is. Then, in patch 4.4, Gilgamesh and Saber had some ridiculous infinite looping potential as well, which single-handedly caused Hoyo to target Gilgamesh's kit to get rid of it. Remembrance Trailblazer is definitely to blame for some of this, due to their ability to grant a crazy amount of action advances because of how Mem's charge interacts with allies that generate a crazy amount of energy, but since Hoyo is of course heavily incentivized to not nerf characters that have already released, Gilgamesh is the one who took the fall. Now here we are on live servers, and Mortonak's Blade is still capable of infinite looping. But all of the infinite loops I've mentioned so far all have quite a few caveats. First off, it is heavily reliant on Eidolons on every character, especially E6 Blade and E6 Tribby. So clearly this isn't something that most people will have access to. Additionally, you could argue that having this level of investment should enable a team to clear all content regardless. So the infinite loop isn't really changing much in practice, even if it is still problematic for the game's mechanics. Secondly, the infinite loops are heavily reliant on enemy scenarios as well. Generally, you're going to need to be in some form of consistent AoE content in order to get enough energy for Tribby to enable the infinite loops with Mortonak's Blade. There are technically ways of enabling infinite loops even in single target, but these strategies usually require completely impractical things, like an E6 Mighty who is unleveled. So if anybody happened to accidentally pull an E6 Mighty and then never leveled him up, sure, it's technically doable. But as you can see, in practice, these infinite loops that are currently happening on live servers are not going to be practical for most people or for most content. Again, that isn't to say that they aren't still problematic, but just not very practical. So that brings us to the million-dollar question. What is Hoyo going to do about these infinite loops? Well, if I'm being honest, I don't think Hoyo is going to do anything to the characters currently triggering the infinite loops. Now, that isn't to say Hoyo won't target the infinite loops in any way, but Hoyo tends to be very hands-off when it comes to changing a character's kit after they've already released, with only very few exceptions. So rather than risking a controversy by changing Blade or Tribby or Casterus's kits just to try and stop an infinite loop that isn't practical to begin with, I think Hoyo is infinitely more likely to just design future enemies in a way to make the infinite loops even less practical than they already are. Designing enemies that automatically take turns and do certain mechanics based on how many times you attack them, or designing enemies that nerf the amount of healing you can receive to stop Casterus from getting so much Nubud stacks, or designing enemies that punish you for taking too many turns, stuff like that. Of course, this will be punishing other teams who aren't doing infinite loops just in an attempt to avoid the possibility of these infinite loops clearing all content with 0 action value taken until the end of the game, but it's just a much more likely solution for Hoyo to take. Besides, these aren't the first infinite loops to exist in the game. There have always been conditional infinite loops. That is, characters who can infinitely loop actions with 0 action value value taken under specific conditions, with the most infamous example being Zila. In pure fiction, Zila is capable of constantly looping actions through Resurgence procs and Eagle procs from the extra energy she gets from her E4, not to mention her basic attack action advancing her. The reason Hoyo has no issue with Zila being capable of doing this is because she relies on constantly killing enemies in order to achieve this infinite loop, both for Resurgence procs and for energy. Zila cannot infinitely loop if the HP of enemies in Perfection is too high for her to consistently kill in just a single skill or basic attack. The same goes for Himiko Nova, who also has an infinite loop currently, so long as she is in a matchup with consistent AoE, or if she can continuously benefit from kill energy due to the amount of assist skills that she's capable of launching once she's E2 and paired with certain teammates. It's very strong, obviously, but not nearly as problematic for Hoyo, because they know they can easily just stop it from happening by raising the HP of enemies in AoE situations. And when you aren't in AoE, then these infinite loops won't be happening anyway. So Hoyo's approach to infinite loops has always been to allow the characters to do their thing in their good matchups, and just design future matchups in a way to discourage the infinite loop from being able to happen. This is why I would heavily expect this to continue being their approach for the current infinite loops with Blade and Tribi. While these infinite loops are not reliant on killing enemies for energy the same way the Zila and Himiko infinite loops are, they do still have specific conditions that need to be met, and those conditions are what Hoyo will punish, rather than punishing the character's kits with any direct nerfs. However, Hoyo can still punish the kits of any character who has not yet released. And that finally brings us to the main topic of this video, and my main concern in regards to these infinite loops: Robin and Aventurine. As I stated earlier, infinite loops have been a thing for a while, but they have become especially prevalent recently due to both Mortonak's Blade and Gilgamesh, two recent characters. Therefore, I think we can all agree that Hoyo is going to be much more cautious when it comes to designing future characters, and the possibility of creating more infinite loops is definitely going to be at the forefront of their minds. The reason this is potentially so concerning for both Robin and Aventurine specifically is because, based on all the rumors we have about these two, which, to be fair, is not a ton of info, but based on what we do know, these two have kits that would specifically put them in the crossfire of enabling more infinite loops. You see, there are three main causes of infinite loops: energy, frequent attacks, and HP draining. To be honest, in the end, it all really just comes back around to energy, and certain characters utilizing frequent actions or HP draining as a way to funnel their energy, such as Acheron and Castoris. But in a nutshell, these are the main ways to enable infinite loops for certain teams. And wouldn't you know it, Robin just so happens to be a Remembrance character who is rumored to work well with Evernight, therefore presumably interacting with HP mechanics in some way, and thus is at risk of further enabling the infinite loop with Castoris. And Aventurine is rumored to be the final teammate for the Ashblade follow-up attack team, therefore presumably having or benefiting from frequent follow-up attacks, which makes him even more at risk of enabling more infinite loops with Mortonak's Blade. It's just the perfect storm for a nightmare scenario for Hoyo's balancing team. So many infinite loops have been surfacing, largely due to the careless balancing of Mortonak's Blade's mechanics, and now Robin and Aventurine are the two characters who are the most likely to enable infinite loops, unless Hoyo is gutting their mechanics right now before the kit concepts have even entered the beta. There is a very real chance that the rumors about what kinds of kits and teams Robin and Aventurine are made for end up completely off the mark. Not even necessarily because the leakers were incorrect, but quite possibly just because Hoyo changed their design direction due to the risk of infinite loops. I don't think this is necessarily what's going on behind the scenes, but it's definitely a possibility. What I think is much more likely is that Hoyo is going to water down Robin and Aventurine's mechanics by a lot, giving them less ways to interact uniquely with HP and follow-up attacks, despite still being made for those teams. This way, they can much more easily control how their kits work and ensure they don't overlook anything that might make the balance nightmare of infinite loops even worse. In order to compensate, I could see them massively pumping up the damage numbers or buffing numbers for Robin and Aventurine, giving them large multipliers in exchange for giving them less interesting gameplay mechanics. Now, again, I wouldn't say this is necessarily likely to happen either, but I'm just expressing some of my concerns for what Hoyo is going to do as a result of the infinite loops, because I genuinely do not think they will lay a finger on the current characters, and I definitely think that future characters are going to be the only ones taking the fall for it. Obviously, I hope Robin and Aventurine don't suffer too much for it, even though I agree that the infinite loops do need to be targeted. But regardless, even if their mechanics do suffer for it, I guarantee both characters will still be very strong on release in terms of being able to clear content, since most characters release in a pretty good state nowadays. So I'm not doom posting them and saying that these characters are actually going to suffer or be treated poorly by Hoyo. I'm sure they are both going to be perfectly meta for their respective teams on release. I'm just afraid that we are about to witness a new era for Hoyo when it comes to beta balancing, where they crack down on characters much harder, like they did in the 4.4 beta, in order to try and dig themselves out of the hole they've buried themselves in, with the infinite looping potential of characters like RMC and Mortonak's Blade and Tribi, who have already released and thus cannot be meddled with without major backlash from the community. But what are your thoughts on the infinite loops and their potential impact on the game and future characters? After all, the point of this video was not to doompost, but simply to open up a discussion about the current ongoing phenomenon of infinite loops in Honkai Star Rail, as well as to discuss any concerns about how it might impact Robin and Aventurine. Given that these are my two most anticipated characters since Amphorius, I really am keeping my fingers crossed that all goes well for them. And again, I'm not too concerned about their power level, and mainly I just hope their kits are still cohesive with their teams without needing to be carried by inflated multipliers. I would love to hear what you think on the subject though, in the comments below. Be sure to like the video if you found it helpful or enjoyable at all, and subscribe to the channel for more HSR content. I'll have a lot of videos covering Robin and Aventurine throughout their beta, especially once I manage to get hands-on experience with testing them, so keep your eyes out for that. For now, thank you so much for watching, and with all of that said, until next time!